Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. It's February 27th, and this is yet another SIG CLI meeting. My name is Mate. I'm one of the SIG CLI leads, and I'll be hosting you today. So, one announcement that I have is that the code freeze for 114 starts next Thursday. This basically means you should have all your PRs open and merged by the next Thursday, which leaves us about a week and a day to get whatever crazy stuff you're working on for 114 to land in master. If you have a bigger feature that you are working on and you know that you're not going to make it, you have to apply for an exception, but that will be very hard to get in. Most of the code should land by March 7th. It's still a week, so hopefully everything will be up and ready. I still have a PR to reshuffle kubectl, so I need to close that one and hopefully merge it by that time. From what I'm looking at the test playbook, Sean was leading and looking after our test queue for the past 2 weeks. So Sean, can you give us an update? What was it like?
Sure, it was actually very calm. We still have a couple of flakes, but it was basically green the entire time. And the flakes that we were having before with the port forwarding tests seem to be fixed. I think that's a combination of us moving to another release, as well as there were some fixes that Nikolai put in. So at least it feels like it's actually getting even more solid.
Okay. Quick reminder, each and every single one of you can sign up to watch the merge queue and the test queue. We have a document describing how to do it. The list that you see in front of you is the list of names where you put your name and you can sign up to make the role. If you have any questions with regards to what are your duties and responsibilities, feel free to reach out to Sean or myself or Phil, and we'll be more than happy to answer all your questions. Since I'm not seeing anyone sign up for the next 2 weeks, I'm gonna probably just copy my name over there.
And you could put me as well. I'll do it again if you want me to.
Okay, if you say so, then I'm gonna put your name in that case. Thank you.
Yep. It's been pretty easy.
Yeah, I'm hoping that, especially with the port forwarding tests hopefully fixed, the entire thing will be getting more and more in shape. Okay, so with those items crossed out, we can move to the main agenda topics, since there's quite a few of them. So, Ahmed, go ahead and pick up the floor.
Hello, you can hear me all right, right?
Yep, loud and clear. You want to share your screen?
I'll quickly share my screen for not too long, hopefully. Okay, so today I would like to talk about Crew, the plugin manager that we're working on. A couple months ago, I gave a presentation about how Crew works. Since then, the project has grew a bit, so I came here to give an update, basically. So Crew project, as some of you might know, is a plugin manager that we've been developing at Google. It is trying to make it super easy to install and discover plugins for users. And if you're a plugin developer yourself, it's trying to make it easier to package and distribute and make your plugins discoverable. So Crew project has reached 500 stars since the last time we checked in here. We are hosting over 30 plugins right now. So these plugins live in a centralized repository called Crew Index. Here, we got pretty much like 1 or 2 plugin submissions every week, which is great. And a lot of people are actively working on their plugins, and they're listing in their READMEs like, hey, install Crew, and then just run Crew install my plugin name, and then you're going to get my plugin. So these people are coming and updating their versions of their plugins a lot too. So these are, I think the plugin ecosystem is growing maybe better than we expected so far. So I want to go a little bit about like where we want to go with this project. So right now, I am pretty much the only maintainer on this project, and I am honestly looking for help. And I'm hoping that this would be a community effort and not just something one person from Google is doing. So basically, if anyone is interested in the SIG helping with something like this, I'm actively looking for maintainers to onboard. So if plugins are interesting to you, please come find me. If you haven't seen Crew before, I would suggest you to check it out, or I can probably just give a quick 1-minute demo. So right now I have a kubectl installation, and I installed Crew on my machine. So I just type kubectl crew search, for example. So this gives me all the available plugins, right? Let's say I choose one of them, excess metrics up here, which shows an excess metrics for RBAC, I guess. So I type kubectl crew install excess metrics, and then this plugin is right now being downloaded. And then after it is downloaded and installed, I will be able to just type kubectl excess metrics. And as you see here, this person created a great plugin that visualizes how does like the RBAC of the current user, what can it do on the current cluster. So this is a simple plugin that is written for kubectl, and it is easily installable with Crew. And we can upgrade and delete this plugin as well. So this is pretty much Crew. I'm basically trying to also look guidance from the SIG on what to do with this project. Like, where should we take it, and like how can we get more attention of developers? How can we get attention of developers to write more plugins or onboard their plugins more easier? So if you have a plugin, please definitely check it out and give feedback. And I'm also open to any guidance about this. So I came here to mostly to discuss what does the SIG think about the feature of this.
Hi, Ahmed. It's Sean. I had a quick question while I have you about security. Have we done? So it feels like security is obviously going to be a big area to focus on. What efforts have we done so far?
Right. I think since the last time we talked, we didn't really do anything. It is basically right now the current process is there's a centralized repo everyone sends their plugin to, and I have a simple CI that validates like structurally the plugin is installable on all platforms, and then we go and accept the plugin submission. We don't know what code goes in it. It is entirely up to the user to trust to that system or not. So right now, if you're installing a plugin from a source that you don't know, that's a problem. Similarly, I'm trying to figure out how can we disable the centralized discovery and have people, like say you work at Red Hat and you only want plugins from Red Hat repositories to be installed. So how can we accommodate this? So we'll need like a multi-index model for this, or like people maybe don't want to submit to the centralized index and they want to have like a GitHub repository. So you want to like trust to that repo only. So there's a lot. I think there are some designs. Juan made a design around this as well. We haven't found the time to go and implement it. So like actual Crew source code actually has been untouched for a couple of months and it's been working fine, but we will need more features to actually support real use cases. So I think we'll get there at one point, but definitely need help.
So first of all, I'm literally have 2 PRs open, and we are moving the plugin mechanism to GA in 1.14, which should also spread the adoption of the plugin mechanism. So that's one thing. What we can do, aside from evangelizing that there is this kind of functionality, is that we should probably, and I remember we were talking about it some time ago, migrate the project, both Crew and the Crew index, under Kubernetes SIG, and this will be one of the sub-projects for SIG CLI to work on. Similarly to what we did with Customize, I'm not saying that we will eventually put crew inside of kubectl. That's probably a separate discussion that we will have at some point in time. But definitely starting with the move from under Google Container Tools, GitHub organization over to Kubernetes 6 will allow us to gather more attention around both of the project, the crew itself, and the index. As for the multi-index support, yes, that's probably a thing. I'm more than 100% sure that we, as Red Hat, we will have customers that will be requesting us to have a set of verified plugins that they can install. So we need to have this kind of functionality in place to be able to override the index or provide some sort of hierarchy or list of index places that we will be looking for, through. So I'm guessing that currently the repo location, the index location, is just hard coded somewhere in the crew, right?
Yeah, it is hard coded indeed.
Yeah. Phil, do you know what is the process so that we can move the crew project, like both of them, under Kubernetes 6? I think we need to ask SIG architecture for a blessing for those two repos, and then probably we can just go ahead with moving the project from there to there. Am I right?
Yeah, I'm not even sure we need to ask SIG architecture. I think as the governance is written, it's tech leads from the SIG that's hosting.
Right, because this is we're not talking about the main Kubernetes repo, but we're rather talking about the SIG, so that should fall in under.
Yeah. And I think the question would be if there was like, is this in scope for the Kubernetes project? And that would be maybe worth talking to SIG architecture about. However, like SIG architecture has, or folks in SIG architecture have asked us about plugins on several occasions and seemed like they were pushing us wanting to do more work there. So, and we've said that not having a distribution mechanism is really preventing us from leveraging that mechanism. So I don't think there's going to be.
Yeah, I think it nicely falls into whatever we're doing within the SIG CLI. Even though we stated initially that kubectl does not have any blessed mechanism for managing plugins, we never said that we're not going to write any. And having a separate tool, which is a plugin by itself, and ensuring that we have a strong user base and there's sufficient support and requirements from users to use it, I think that will be easy then to support. And based on what Ahmed said, there is the need from people to make installing and basically managing plugins much better.
I think the biggest thing I think we need to think about is what our support model is for this, because like Ahmed said that he is looking for other people to help carry the torch on this, and we should be upfront about like what we plan on giving. Like I think moving into Kubernetes SIGs and then trying to, like, we can promote it and say, hey, contribute to this project is a great thing to do. We need to decide if, like, for instance, we have our tests, the test on call, like, does this fall under the test on call for that? And my thought would be initially not no, and we'd have to have a separate, like, making it part of the test on call would be a separate step. It would be my.
Or eventually we can also create a new role just for the plugin maintainer or something like that. That would just follow nicely what was sent out recently with regards to spreading the roles that we might have within the SIGs. I think that would falls nicely, and it would encourage more people that are interested in plugins to help out with those particular stuff only.
Yeah, and I'd say actually the last item on the agenda is actually about updating SIG CLI membership, but also sub-project ownership. And I think right now we don't have a really clear model for who owns what sub-projects and what the like paths for getting input and like escalating decisions that we're not quite sure on to get more feedback and broader feedback is. And so developing a structure of saying like, here's owners files for each sub-project and subdividing kube control perhaps into like diff, I'd imagine should clearly be owned by Antoine, who wrote that piece of kube control, like formalizing some of that stuff. And so that Antoine, like someone coming to the project knows, okay, if I have a thing about diff, this is the owner. And if Antoine wants to have greater, broader input, he knows where to go. Like up the chain, up the file hierarchy chain to a higher level owners file and pull in those people.
Yeah. Ahmed, maybe you can start by sending an email to SIG CLI requesting SIG CLI to accept crew as a sub-project. I would probably CC SIG architecture and maybe SIG apps, since that somewhat falls under what they are doing. I think that these three SIGs should be informed about, and overall maybe Kubernetes dev, and that should suffice. And then we'll wait for what people will say, and after a couple of days, we'll just say if there are no objections, that we will continue with this, and we will move the projects under Kubernetes 6, because I'm more than 100% sure that this is the place where they should land. And then at the same time, that email will spark some discussions and will bring awareness of the project to other Kubernetes devs as well.
That sounds good.
Awesome. Thanks very much.
Thank you. I think primarily I'm looking for like guidance and expertise from the SIG, and as well as like finding a way to like onboard new maintainers. And even though it is not a main sub project that the SIG actively supports with on-call rotation and stuff like that, any help there will be super appreciated.
Sure. I'm pretty sure that we will have to, well, for maintaining the crew itself, we could probably just apply the same guidelines as we have for kubectl. As for the index itself, we will have to probably write down some guidelines for people that will be interested in maintaining those, because it will be slightly more challenging to ensure that the plugins that we're letting people accept, what kind of requirements we expect from the plugins included in the index should be there. And at the same time, the fact that we will be working on a Kubernetes 6, we could and we should reuse the entire testing infrastructure for that we have. So that would be probably the initial stuff that we'll have to work on. Just follow up with me on Slack, and we can figure out what will be the next steps. I'm more than happy to be one of the maintainers for both, definitely.
Sounds good.
We probably want to the indexing thing, I think, is actually most of the complexity of this thing, or where most of the decisions need to be made. And so maybe we should defer that for a separate discussion, accept crew as the project first, but say like SIG CLI is not maintaining this index and is not blessed yet. I think there's I actually have a lot of ideas around ways we could do this that we should discuss them later.
In that case, we should probably make it somewhat configurable before putting it so that it's not hard coded. And then, that should be a very simple thing to do. And then, yeah, it definitely, the index is the tricky part, the most tricky part, I'd say, due to what are the guidelines for accepting plugins, what are the requirements, how we verify, do we provide any guarantees with regards to the plugins that are available there, etc., etc. So yeah, let's start with Crew first, and keep the discussion going on the index itself as well.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay. Next, are there any questions to Ahmed with regards to Crew or the index, how it works, the purpose, etc.? Okay, hearing none, moving on to the next topic. Phil, observability cap.
So if you don't mind, what I did is I just like put all my 3 at the top, so I'll go through them, and I'll just try and be really quick on all of them. And
sure,
if you want to have a discussion, we can do it at the end after we talk about the util stuff. So real quickly, I have an observability cap out, which attaches headers to requests from kubectl sent to the API server. It has the subcommand that was sent, the names of the flags that were provided, but not their values. It has 2 additional headers for whether or not the input was from a file, from a remote URL, or from a standard in, just so we can have a better understanding of how people are using the system. And then standard out, whether it was like YAML or custom columns or Go templates. And this will help us like understand whether people are actually using Go templates, because there's some issues with those and CRDs and this sort of thing. So come take a look at that, and it would be targeted at 1.15, so it's not urgent. I think it might be a good new contributor issue. The second item is, and leave comments on the PR or at the end of the meeting. The second comment is about updating SIG CLI membership. If you look at the owner's aliases, they're actually, I think those were auto-generated, and they don't seem to reflect what's been going on for the past year or so. For instance, I'm not in the maintainers list. So I think what I'd like to do is like reset those, and maybe just do like a yearly reset, where I was planning on just deleting everyone from all the lists and then sending out an email to SIG CLI and the folks in them to say, if you want to still be part of this maintainer or still part of the SIG CLI membership, please comment on the PR with like a justification with some of the work you've done, right? And I'm not looking for a real high bar here, but just something to show that like you've shown sustained activity for the past 6 months or a year. And then also that's a great opportunity to bring in new folks who may not be part of those lists. So that was the best way I could think of doing that, was just delete everyone. And then that way everyone is set at the same bar and there's no real grandfathering people in forever. And then lastly, the docs update. I'll just share my screen real quickly here. If I can figure out how to do that. Oh, looks like someone else is sharing. Well, yeah. There's a link. There's a link there in the document. I've demoed the docs, I think at least once, twice in the past. I've demoed SIG apps. I've demoed them to SIG docs. I plan on demoing them to SIG API machinery. They are starting to take the form I intend for them to have. By the way, like I'm the only one who's been working on these. I'm not complaining about that, but it's just like a buyer beware. Like the opinions in here are heavily skewed towards my opinions because I've gotten, I've been the primary author of these things. But they're taking shape and they're focused really around steering people towards declarative management of applications and really framing the kubectl run, kubectl set image, kubectl scale commands as porcelain for developer workflow. Some of the information here is copied directly from the existing documentation from kdesk.io, but restructured to have a different like chapters and different highlighting and just cleaned up a bit, updated with out-of-date stuff. Some of it's copied directly from the kubectl command line CLI. Not sure that that's strictly necessary, but I thought if you're going one end-to-end book, it's nice to have all the information in one source, so you don't have to go scrambling across multiple sources. So I copied some of that in there specifically for the porcelain pieces. Some of this is brand new documentation. Some of this is customized documentation. But the goal is to walk people through from here's a very basic introduction to Kubernetes APIs and how the tooling is structured, very briefly, to here's how you create a single instance of an application, generate secrets, generate config maps, set up namespaces, to here's how you do more complex customizations of apps with multiple environments and that sort of thing, to here's how you actually deploy those apps with diffing, state before applying them, with how you roll out to different clusters using the context flag to target a specific cluster, through different composition directory structuring techniques, resource printing, then debugging. So I kind of split out the existing Git and describe into a whole section, and the container, all the container commands, logs, exec, attach, copying files, port porting, proxying into a section, and then imperative porcelain. So the goal here is, oh, and one last thing is that if you look at the existing documentation in Kubernetes.io and start poking around, you'll see that a lot of it is very out of date. For instance, if you go into the run application section on tasks, there is a section called perform rolling update using a replication controller. Replication controller you shouldn't be using, and you shouldn't be using the rolling update command. You should be using a deployment. There's a lot of this stuff all over. There's a lot of kubectl create-f, which is not going to help anyone the next time they need to update that object, because it won't work. There's references to replication controllers in the other references to replication controllers in the documentation. So all of that is to say that the existing docs are very much out of date and inconsistent with how we actually want users to be using the system. And so my plan is to go through the existing Kubernetes.io documentation, delete sections, and also have folks redirected to this book for sections that now exist here. That's all.
Okay, awesome. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good, because my Zoom is in a weird state and I was wondering whether I'm connected or I'm not. Okay. I love the Zoom client. Are there any questions to Phil with regards to either observability cap, the SIG CLI membership updates, or the doc updates? I'm guessing for the cap and for doc updates, the best questions, suggestions would be to leave them out on the caps, and Phil send out both of the cap and the doc update PR to SIG CLI mailing list. So please do check them both and leave your comments or suggestions over there. That will definitely not lose the comments. As for the SIG CLI membership, Phil, what are you planning to do with what will be the next steps you're planning to do with the membership?
I'll put the PR together. I just wanted to give an update at the meeting, so folks didn't get a PR that had them deleted and have no context for that.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Okay, hearing none. Moving over to my topic. So there was a PR last week which was moving kubectl drain functionality to a separate sub-package in kubectl. Well, initially the goal was to move it under Kubernetes utils or something like that, but I stopped it, complaining that this is completely in the other direction that SIG CLI is currently moving due to future extraction of kubectl to separate repo. So at the end of the day, we decided that we will just create a separate package in kubectl, which will be devoted only to the drain command. That is meant for other people to easily consume part of the kubectl and share the functionality that we have hard-coded in the kubectl. In that particular case, that was drain. And while talking with the author, I remember he was also a SIG CLI meeting several times. He mentioned that he was actually looking for some kind of a utils repo for client-side procedures, meaning that there is some kind of functionality more than a single API call that we have currently baked inside of kubectl, and whether having some kind of a util repo with these functionality would make sense. CLI runtime was brought up for discussion there, but my suggestion was that CLI runtime was more of a general CLI library rather than specific functionality, which, for example, drain would be. So drain was not a good fit for CLI runtime. CLI runtime is meant for to be consumed by well, ideally all of the plugin authors or kubectl-like commands, whereas the utils is not necessarily. And the question is whether we want to have some kind of a util repo, or the fact that we will have, in the near future, we will have a separate kubectl repo inside of which we'll have those packages that will contain functionality devoted to specific commands, which should make the vendoring of those packages super simple for people that are, instead of copying pasting the entire functionality, that would want to reuse some parts of kubectl. And I would like to hear what others think about that approach.
So I do see the difference between CLI runtime and something that could provide more command-specific behavior. So I myself would be in favor of having a second repository, maybe called CLI utilities, that aims at providing that. So in essence, I still see something like CLI utilities as a repo being used by third-party clients and plugins, perhaps. I just think that, like you said, Maciej, because the scope is more centric to particular commands, that it should be kept separate. It should be kept within its own silo, so to speak.
Does anyone have any concerns about this?
Well, my biggest concern with splitting that kind of functionality into separate repo is that these set of utils functionalities are tightly coupled with kubectl commands. I'm not sure we want to have a separate util repo, which would be replicating the majority of functionality that kubectl will have.
So I have an opinion on that. Hi, this is Antoine. I've seen a few people who are trying to reproduce some of the functionalities of kubectl without having to fork and spawn a kubectl binary. Like they're like building some libraries that needs to interact with Kubernetes, and they want to do things that are similar to kubectl, but they don't want to do os.system kubectl because that's terrible. And so I see a lot of people who are like, I have a bunch of files, I want to read these files, get objects, and maybe do something, create them on the server. And one of the solutions we have is that they can use the resource builder, but the resource builder depends on the generic CLI options. The generic CLI options install --f for you, which maybe makes no sense for this person. And so I think the CLI runtime is very much CLI driven, which I think is not necessarily the correct abstraction we're looking for. We're looking for an abstraction which is, we want the features of kubectl, not necessarily the CLI features of kubectl. And I see how drain might be useful, for example. And yeah, like typically, so now apply is going to be extremely easy to implement for people, but they still need to read files somewhere. They need to parse the files. They need to find the GVK and all of these things. And they don't want to know about --f and all of these things. So I definitely see a value. I was going to do something maybe in the API machinery repository, because the API machinery already has the logic to split by --. So I was like, maybe it should live here. I don't know. But I see the usefulness of such a repository. At least we need to figure out where this should live.
Well, first of all, you should be able to use the resource builder without the necessity to attach --f flags, because these two should be separate. If it's not, then we have a bug that we need to fix. But I'm quite confident that you can separate these two. You don't have to have the flags, but you should be able to use the resource builder, which should answer the first question. With regards to the functionality, the other issue that I have with regards to providing the utils is that we're trying to move a lot of the functionality over to the server. So ideally, we would have all the logic that is currently baked into kubectl available on the server. And I remember that at some point in time, and that was one of the directions that we were going through. I'm not saying we will be there in a couple of months, but rather in a couple of years more. But eventually, those functionality will be available on the server. And the reason for that is the consumers, because even if we provide the library will, again, limit the scope of users to only Go developers, because we will provide those libraries in Go. Whereas having this functionality on the server side, similarly to what you did with server-side apply, similarly to what happened with the server-side print, opens the gates to a broader set of users, including, because I'm guessing this is the biggest amount of people is the web users, web consoles that are replicating the functionality of kubectl with JavaScript.
No, I completely agree with you. I think we need to have many different languages, and we can't restrict to only Go. But I think we'll always need a sort of like thin layer to talk to the server anyway, which is why I'm saying maybe it should live in API machinery, because it's just a way to interact with the server. I don't know, but yes, I agree. But the layer should be thin, but it's always going to be needed.
Yeah, I'm not saying it won't be needed, but it will be ideally, it will be a simple set of calls, and not like currently it is that the entire functionality of the drain is hard-coded in the drain command.
At the same time, if we come up with the good abstractions, maybe we could make this a command in the library, like drain, and later if we decide to move it to the server, we could replace the implementation, and it's just going to do the right thing for you.
Do we, so we have something related to this, which is moving kube control out. This is aligned with that in the sense that like this necessitates moving those commands out. Does this, it seems like this work is strictly in addition to that, like neither speeds it up nor slows it down. Do we, like, who would be, do we have someone staffed to do this, right? Because I can imagine, like, is there a developer like saying, "Oh, I'll do this for you," or is he just asking for it?
He was just asking. I don't think. Well, maybe he could help us with this, but in all honesty, I would rather do the move to separate repo of kubectl. And then I was talking with him whether he would be satisfied if only the kubectl functionality would be living in a separate repo, whether that would suffice for his use case, because then he would just vendor in kubectl itself and could reuse the functionality. Of course, within the kubectl, we would need to ensure that the functionalities are available in packages to be reused. Not in such a way that he would have to instantiate the entire drain command, because that's not what we want. And this is how we ended up with this PR, that the functionality of the drain was moved to a util under package kubectl. So currently, the only downside is that you need to vendor entire Kubernetes repo, but the functionality of the drain, the logic of drain, is a helper that you can easily import and reuse, and it's not tied to the kubectl drain command, but rather kubectl drain command invokes the same helper.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Like we could, it makes sense to move the code. Like folks can refactor into utils. We move kubectl out of Kubernetes. At that point in time, people should be able to vendor or use Go modules or whatever to get those Go packages. And whether it lives in a Kubernetes SIG repo or not is kind of like a question of logistics. Does it make it harder for us to release? Does it make it easier to manage issues? But shouldn't be a blocker for anyone.
Yeah, exactly. I would rather focus us focusing currently on the separation, because it is hard and it is taking so much longer than we initially anticipated, and we're still a couple commands away from doing that. So
where are we at on that?
I'm not sure if Sean is still on the call. He mentioned that he will be leaving in the second half.
Okay.
So we need to sync with Sean and ask him about that next time. But I remember that there were still RBAC related stuff, which was tightly coupled, and Juan had a private PR that he linked somewhere in the agenda a month ago or so. That was initially approved by Jordan because it was related it was touching RBAC storage, and the other item was convert, which we all agreed to still keep within the main repo, because convert requires both internal and external versions, and that will never change because kubectl should be only external. And if I'm correct, there's still one command, printers, I think, that needs to be externalized, because we had somebody fixing describers in 113, if I'm not wrong.
But also, since we're talking about printers, in addition to externalizing the print handlers, there is one more item to take care of with regards to watch events. So currently, watch events return external objects, which ideally we would want to have table objects there, since currently there's no way to take advantage of server-side printing with those. I'm not sure to what extent this blocks the effort to split from from the main repo, but it is a concern nonetheless going forward.
Is server-side printing, like, does it exist for all the main types now?
Yes.
Okay, so that means like in releases we can just delete that code in theory, right? Or the client.
Yeah, sort of. If we turned on the server-side printing by default in 1.12 or 13, but due to the problems with the watches, we haven't deprecated the flag yet. So we need to first deprecate the server-side print so that this becomes default and you cannot opt out of it. And then after a year, we will be able to entirely deprecate this functionality and drop this code. But like I said, that's least of a problem, because as we discussed in some of the meetings ago, we will freeze the code we will externalize it, we will freeze it, and we will forbid any changes. If somebody wants to change the format that data are being printed, he should modify the server-side printing of the resources and not the client part. The client part, it will diverge, and that's perfectly fine. We will just freeze it at the moment of doing it. That was the agreement that we had a couple weeks back.
Okay.
So we're still probably 2-3 commands away. I'll try to touch base with Sean and figure out how far we are, what we can push forward to get closer to the final step, and I'll sync with Juan with regards to the RBAC command. If I remember correctly, that was auth reconcile. Maybe we could get some bits in for 114, and then maybe at the beginning of 115 start with the move to staging, because I'm pretty sure that the actual move will showcase us much more stuff that we just need to fix than we are anticipating at this moment in time.
Okay. Sounds good. A little
Okay.
bit fun.
Yeah. Are there any stand-ups? Do people want to share what they've been working on, or are there any PRs that you are interested in getting reviews or anything like that? Okay, hearing none. With that, I think we can close the meeting. Thank you very much all for attendance, and see you in 2 weeks. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.